Good afternoon, Diwakar, and welcome to Design Dialogues hosted by Rethinking the Future in collaboration with Publis. This is your host, Bhavya, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Diwakar, one of the founders of Studio Chintala. Studio Chintala is an architecture firm known for its thoughtful, contextual, sensitive design that blends contemporary aesthetic with local traditions. Based in India, the firm emphasizes a sustainable approach to architecture, creating spaces that resonate with cultural and environmental nuances of their surroundings. With the focus on innovation and environmental changes in nuances, functionality, this studio strives to craft experiences that are both visually striking and deeply connected to their context. Thank you for joining us, Devakar.
Thank you, Bhavya. It's a pleasure to join you, and hopefully, we can have a good conversation.
So, before starting the questions, I would like to inform you that this interview will be published on the website of Publis. So, sign up on the Publis website and you'll get the access to watch this interview. So, shall we proceed with the questions?
Yes, let's go.
So, first question for the day. How does your Studio Chintala approach community and cultural context in the initial design phase of any project? And could you also share an example where these aspects were the key principles to your design solution?
It's a great place to start. Maybe this is a good opportunity to actually state our studio's design philosophy. I think when we started the studio in 16, I was asked by one of our designers, all studios have a philosophy, and what's ours? Well, I had a lot of philosophies and a lot of ideas over the years that I've sort of grown to understand, appreciate, and hopefully live by. But to talk about one singular philosophy was really hard for me at that point. So we said, okay, let's give it some time. And like all philosophies, we would hope that it would come. So it took us a while, and maybe a year or so after starting the studio, and it became very clear. So our philosophy or studio's vision statement or belief system, values, whatever you want to call it, is really, we say design is problem solving, the process of finding the simplest and most logical solutions. So beauty is merely a byproduct of this process. Beauty comes from the inherent simplicity and honesty of the process. And so fundamentally, we say you don't have to worry too much about beauty. You need to solve the problem. Now, that's where I'm going to try and answer your question. Solving the problem to us is really about understanding each project and saying, what is it at stake? What is at stake here? We're designing a school, and what is at stake here? It's the kids, it's the teachers, it's the administration, it's the people at large. But the fundamental sort of component of a school is the kids and the young minds that are going to be shaped presumably in that context. So the community, the people really become center stage. So then, our philosophy, if you were to align this with the philosophy, you're saying the problem really is to create a space for this community to thrive. So community, people, however you want to define the word community, communal spaces, and so on, is really central to our practice. We know we of course appreciate context. We approach of course appreciate materiality, lighting, history, and a whole host of things that we're taught that drive design ideas and design values. But we put community and people at the top. And we believe that fundamentally we're designing for people. And what good is it if it's minimalist, if it's brutalist, if it's vernacular, if it's whatever, if it can't address the fundamental idea of people? So we put everything aside. And that's again going back to, we say beauty is really not something you can force, you can conceive really. Beauty is beyond that. Beauty comes from the honesty of the approach to solve the problem. So if you can single-mindedly, and it's hard, it's almost impossible, I think, to remove yourself from the idea of beauty because we're so enamored and consumed by the idea of making things beautiful. But if you can, and that's the practice, that's the challenge, that's the tapas, is if you can pull yourself out of this idea of making things beautiful, truly, genuinely, and really focus on the community, the people, then beauty takes care of itself because you're being very honest in trying to solve the problem. I hope that makes sense. I really kind of strongly believe a studio is driven by that idea, and it's not just a bunch of words. It's something we're not perfect, but we remind ourselves on a daily basis that we are not here to create beauty. We're here to create spaces that meet communities' needs. And in the process, we would do it very honestly. And that's what I mean by honesty. To not do it because you want to make it beautiful. You do it because you truly want to solve the problem, which is giving a nice space for people to thrive in. If it's a school, creating a school where kids can grow, learn, thrive. And if you do that honestly, beauty takes care of itself. And you don't have to worry too much about, is this proportion right? Is this, because the honesty, the simplicity of the approach makes it enduring, where it's timeless, presumably, and it goes beyond style, beyond vernacular, beyond materiality. It's just logic, just good old physics, good old logic. Yeah. So it's very important for us, and I think we could not do our work if we didn't focus on the people. And I would put it that strong.
Very well said, Diwakar. So moving on to the next question. So many of your projects has been observed have a very unique spatial compositions. Could you explain how spatial planning and functionality are integrated with your aesthetic vision?
Yeah, so again, I think it's a good question to kind of follow up on what we just started talking about. We, for years, were consumed, in my journey of being a designer, have been consumed about the choreography of space, the composition of space, the sequencing of spaces, all the things we are taught in school, all the things we strive to do, all the things we talk about experience. You bring somebody into a lobby and I take them. So the whole drama of space is very important. I think you're very right that space is a lot more critical than masses for the experience. Masses are more visual delight, spaces are more experiential. So you're 100% right. Then how do we approach that whole drama of space, if you will? And again, we have relieved ourselves from all the burdens of working too hard to make a composition and pretend we are choreographers and conductors of music or space. Really, what we do is just solve the problem. So you see a lot of our work is dumb boxes because we say, hey, I'm making a school, the kids need a classroom, a rectangle sometimes is an easy thing to build, and we need a corridor. And so it's very, very much driven by logic. There's very little importance, emphasis on thinking about this. At least we try. Again, we're not perfect. I fail every day. Catch myself failing every day because I'm also trained to think, oh, is this going to look cool? And then I have to remind myself, Diwakar, it's not about looking cool. It's about solving the problem. And we've come to a point in our practice where we have now been assured that if you just put your head down, shut up, and don't overthink it, and just clearly solve the problem. The kids. We actually put up a picture of the kids in our studio and said, these are the people we're designing for, not the spaces, not the materials, not the history, not the context, not all of this. It's really about the lives and the happiness and the joy of these kids. And so, to answer your question, how do we orchestrate the composition of spaces or the sequencing of spaces or the articulation of spaces? We would like to think we don't. We would like to think that they happen because we are very, very honest. Almost like a child. There is no ulterior motive to make the space beautiful. But we do say a kid wants to walk into a lobby. If the lobby is spacious, the kid's going to feel really good about the space, and that's great. And so we think less about the architectural, if you will, spatial composition than the experiential part. So from an experiential standpoint, if the school's lobby wants to be brightly lit and a tall space, a double height space, a triple height space, because the kid comes in, feels very open and not constricted and not restricted, then that's the right space. And so it's less about the visual aspect and more about the experiential aspect. And when you do that, we've learned that when you do that very honestly as possible, humanly possible, more often than not, it turns out to be a fairly well thought through thing because I think the honesty carries the day. the honesty and the removal of yourself and your ego and your training and your idiosyncrasies and your agendas and your idea of winning an award and idea of making a lot of money and impressing the client or impressing the audience or the architect's fraternity is purely about the kid who's going to walk in to the school. And sometimes we give a name to the kid and we keep on saying, okay, what would Mahesh want when he walks in here? Mahesh is 6 years old. He's in grade 2, whatever, or grade 1 or whatever. He walks in. What do you want Mahesh to feel like? And so we forget about the fact that, oh, if we make it a double height space, it'll look amazing. No, what will Mahesh feel? We'll win an award if we, no, it doesn't matter. And so we constantly remind ourselves, guys, calm down. Because we catch ourselves every day saying, oh, that looks really cool. The perspective will look cool and the light will come. We'll be like, okay, calm down. Let's not get carried away here. What will Mahesh, this kid in grade 2B, roll number 22, like what we're creating? And would he really gain value to his learning? And that's what drives our practice. That's really how we look about spatial composition and spatial art.
I think you had a chance to explain it very beautifully. I really like the answer. And so, moving on to one of your
Thank you.
projects, the Amaron Men's Hostel, it showcases a very distinct facade design. Could you elaborate on how the rationale behind its architectural form and material choice was made?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's again a question that really allows me to be on a continuum with the narrative and the story about how we practice. The Amaron Student Hostel was actually an interesting project. The client, we reached out to the client and said, "Hey, we connected through another common colleague, and we said, hey, do you guys have some work for us?" And they said, "Yeah, but it's probably not suitable for your, you know, firm because you guys do a little bit of high-end stuff." And we said, "No." I mean, that's on the contrary, we would love to. In fact, we take pride in doing a variety of things. We are not only interested in doing corporate offices and buildings and hotels and five-star hotels. We want to do a variety, and we believe true architecture or true architectural skills should address the community at large and address all of the social sort of forums and challenges. He said, "No, bring it on." And he said, "Oh, I have a factory workers hostel that we want to design, want to build. It's for battery manufacturing for a battery manufacturing plant. A lot of 18, 19, 19-year-olds who are high school dropouts. They finish their 10th grade and drop out of high school, and then they get vocational training at a skill development center that the client runs. And then they are absorbed into their industries, and they make batteries, car batteries. So they said, we want to provide housing for these people. And, we get hundreds of students graduating, and they go through the skill development program, and then they come and we provide housing on our campus, and they work in our factories. And a lot of them are very young, 18, 19-year-old kids. And we said, okay, would you like to take on the project? We said, absolutely. And so we started out by understanding, again, the community, the people. Who are these people? And we realized that they come from small towns. A lot of them are leaving home for the first time. They're young minds, little bit scared because they're leaving home. They come from small towns. They've decided to drop pursuing further education, and now they're entered the workforce, and they earn and send money home, back home. I mean, so it's a very beautiful story. So we interacted with those people, the workers, long interactions, understanding, and we realized two things. One is the place we were building is a part of Andhra Pradesh that gets very hot, very hot. I think it reaches like 50-ish in the summer. So it's pretty intense heat. And then the second thing, which is more important, equally important, I must say, was that these people were very tentative. They're in many ways just kids because they're just coming of age. They're 18 plus. They're, been in small towns, never exposed to the sort of the big large communities that now they're part of. And so they have a lot of fear and socially disconnected because they've left their parents, their families, and they're coming here. So the two drivers for this project was thermal comfort and emotional comfort, psychological comfort. We realized that they sometimes withdraw, they don't make friends. So we said, okay, here are the two challenges. One is to create, I mean, of course, for a building of that typology, it's impossible to provide air conditioning, right? I mean, we don't have the resources to provide air conditioning for a factory workers housing project. So we said, okay, how can I, through the design, reduce thermal heat gain? One. Two, how through the design can I create psychological comfort? Thermal comfort, psychological comfort. Two drivers. Everything else is besides the point, right? There's a lot of other things. Of course, there's context, there's site constraints, site challenges, or site opportunities, if you want to say that. There's proximity to the factories, there's history, there's culture, everything else. And we're not ignoring everything else. But what we did was we put these two factors of thermal comfort and psychological comfort as the main drivers of the design. And of course, ultimately, the young workforce, the factory workers that are going to be occupying the building. And so we studied them, we talked to them, we did all these things. We do surveys, we hung out with them, we ate with them, understood their insecurities, their joys, their challenges, all of those things. And then we studied the climate and the climatological aspects of the region. And so the facade, your question was to do with how did the form and the facade take shape, was purely driven by, of course, it's a very tight budget. It's a very, I want to say, almost low cost project. There was no room for luxurious materials. It had to be very durable, very hardy, very sustainable, very simple. And we said, okay, how can we, without air conditioning and just ceiling fans, provide thermal comfort, bring the temperature down, maybe 2, 3, 4 degrees in the summer? And we would pat ourselves on the back for doing this because somebody was sleeping and 45 degrees because they work 3 shifts. So they're also sleeping during the day, some people, and it gets very hot. So, how can you bring the temperature down, the ambient temperature from outside to inside down? Even 3, 4, 5 degrees with a fan can actually help you sleep. So, the facade is evolved from that thinking, and we put vertical fins that are shading devices that essentially allow us to shade the building at all times during the day and all times during the year. We've done a lot of solar shading analysis. We've also done a lot of strategies on prevailing winds to ensure that we tap into the prevailing winds because you want to create cross ventilation. All those things that teach us in architecture school really, really matter. And so we've done everything we could from a passive sustainability standpoint. Passive, as in no air conditioning, no fancy tools, just good old sun, wind. How do you cut sun? How do you tap into the winds or the cool breezes? How do you direct it to the rooms? How do you let hot air dissipate? Use stack effect to good use. And so every sustainability strategy in the book and beyond that was passive, didn't cost money, we employed it. All because we wanted to create a space that was cooler than the ambient temperature outside. And then so that's the genesis, I guess, of the facade. And then we also wanted to bring community spaces because the other driver, as I mentioned to you, was psychological comfort. How do you create psychological comfort? You create opportunities for these kids to interact, to run into each other, to say, hey, where are you from? I'm from this town. Oh, I'm from this town. What's your name? What's your name? And they become friends and they hang out. For that, you need spaces. You need spaces that actually enable that. So we designed these beautiful community spaces that are open, different scales, very large for larger groups, very intimate for smaller groups, very intimate for two people to interact, some for 5, some for 20, some for 100 or 50. And so we created different spaces of different compositions to enable different types of social interaction. And essentially, you'll see those big cutouts in the facade, which are actually the large community spaces where we expect and thankfully we love to see that actually people are engaging in those spaces. So it's really beautiful. But again, the facade was never thought of as a composition. Hopefully, as much as possible, we can't help it. Sometimes we're like, oh, that looks cool. But again, we remind ourselves that no, it's about shading, it's about community spaces. So, which were true to our ideologies, and what resulted is what you see. Again, very much driven by the idea of solving a problem, not trying to create the notion of beauty. That's not to say architects should not make things beautiful, they should. But our belief is if you're honest, it's beautiful. It's like a baby. All babies are beautiful because they're not corrupt yet. You start getting corrupt around 3, but until you're 3, you're very innocent. You're like, whatever, right? Your baby will say whatever. But there's no desire to impress, there's no desire to win an award, there's no desire to gain financially or run in a win a race. Babies are so innocent. They just say what they want to say, or they express themselves. And we try every morning to come to the studio and recreate that innocence. If you can recreate that innocence, your buildings will be beautiful. Because anything done with a pure heart can only be beautiful. Maybe not the conventional notion of beauty, but endearing, timeless beauty that is more in the soul than what meets the eye.
Your studio describes design as a blend of art, architecture, and science. Could you elaborate on how this perspective of art and science as a component of design elaborates to you?
Okay, a very pet topic of mine because I think for way too long, again ties into some of the things some of the themes we've touched upon this conversation. I think for far too long, especially when you start out in architecture school, I think you are taught that architecture is the fusion, the meeting of science and art. It's half art, half science, and architecture is the greatest blend of your art and science. You can be an engineer, you can be an artist, and you can be both. And we are so unique in that we are both. No other profession so seamlessly blends the two aspects, so fundamental aspects of existence, which is the esoteric, the non intangible art component that is more experiential, more emotional, that is art. And then there's the science, which is very hard, very real, very rational, very, physics and chemistry. And architecture is this beautiful fusion of the two, and I don't disagree. But I think what I do disagree with is that architects have to overtly try and be artists. And that's where I think excuse me for being so critical, but I think that's where we falter a lot because I think a lot of times architects are consumed with the idea of making things beautiful, and that's what I mean by art. I mean, this idea of composition, this idea of trying to make things pretty, visually appealing, because we've always been told you're the one who can do both. And I think there's this burden of making things beautiful. And of course, beauty is sort of so subjective, right? It's the cliche beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Everybody has their own notion of beauty. And you say, wow, thank goodness, I tried to make something so beautiful and it looks so beautiful. But does everybody agree? No, because what's beautiful to me may not. I like gray curtains, somebody likes pink curtains, somebody likes a spherical shape, somebody likes a cube. I mean, beauty, I don't think, is really something that you can agree upon. So we've said, forget beauty. Beauty will take care of itself. So what, again, we believe that, there are architects and architectural projects that are very much about beauty. I mean, if you look at Frank Gehry, I think his work is driven very much by the form. It's a very formally driven practice. And you can debate about the relevance of his architectural style for a museum. I kind of feel like, okay, museum wants to be visually stunning, appealing, and he does this twisted metallic buildings. Is that doing the job? I think so. I mean, if you are really trying to create awe and a lot of visual delight and just a lot of wow architecture, then I think he's got it. But is all architecture meant to do that? I doubt it. I think by far, I dare say almost maybe 99.99% perhaps of architecture needs to has a bigger responsibility. Has a I mean, we are not the artist can buy a piece of canvas, sit down in his studio, lock the door, and draw a painting or make a piece of art because he's depressed and he broke up with his girlfriend and now he's expressing his sorrow or his pain through art, and then he hangs it in the on the walls of a museum or an art gallery and people love it or hate it, and that's great, and that's an expression of your own sort of state of mind, ideology, point of view. An architect doesn't have that luxury. We are consumed by Mahesh, the kid in second grade who is going to be living in that building, working in, I mean, studying in that building and interacting with it for the next many years. And we have a larger responsibility. We have to think about Mahesh and we have to think about his well being and his state of mind. And I cannot be an obsessive artist and say, I was in the shower and I got this epiphany and I suddenly dreamt this form and I'm going to make it happen. We remove ourselves from that. We are the anti artist. Now, that doesn't mean we hate art. We love art. There is place for art in every project you'll notice we've done. There are art installations that we do. In fact, we take on full scale art installations. We've done one of, I think, Hyderabad's largest urban art examples, 35 feet tall sculpture in an urban space. So, I mean, art definitely has a place and a role in architecture, but art cannot be necessarily confused, or rather, architecture cannot be confused for art. I think there are two different things. Architecture has a larger social responsibility, a community responsibility. Art is fun, art is joy, art is self expression. Art can be commentary, art can be a narrative, it can be a storytelling. Architecture can be some of those, but architecture has a larger responsibility, much more social aspect to it. So, again, they're all connected, but I think we try not to be consumed with the art of the architecture and worry about the people, and the art somehow creeps in. The art makes its way and beauty comes in, like I said.
So could you conclude by that you believe in responsible architecture?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, there is no two ways about it. I think you have, as an architect, you have to be responsible. The spaces we design are for others. A lot of our buildings that we design, we probably would not go back and spend much time in those buildings ever again. In fact, there are projects we do which we go for the opening ceremony and we probably never ever go again. I mean, maybe we would if passing by there, but otherwise it's over. It's we move on to the next project. And who are the ones that are going to be interacting with the building? It's the people. It's the people that have to put up with your idea, your space for the rest of their lives. And how more egotistic can you be to consume yourself and build something that appeals to you and then let the people dwell in it for the rest of their lives? And you're not even seeing it for ever again. So I think that's a very important approach to think, I mean, way to think about architecture. You really you cannot take people for granted. You cannot become consumed with your own ideas, your own idiosyncrasies, your own experiences, your own joys, your own challenges, your own. Of course, all of that informs your architecture, but central to architecture has to be the people. You cannot forget the people you're designing for, because if you've done a good job, they will have a wonderful life. If you don't, they're going to suffer for the rest of the life of that building. And you can really make or break people's lives. I know it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I believe a badly designed house can ruin a family. A well designed house can bring the family together. So an architect has a huge responsibility. How horrible would it feel to know that you've designed a house and the design of the house caused a lot of frustration and anger and fights in the house. And architecture has the power, design has the power to do that. So we need to tread very carefully. We need to be able to handle that responsibility very carefully. And the only way you can do it is to put yourself out of the picture and think of the people you're designing for. It is not about you. Every day I remind myself and I remind the studio, it's not about us. It is not about us. That looks so cool. It is not about what is cool to us. Is it cool to Mahesh? Is he going to enjoy the space? And is that school kid enjoying the space? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So, huge responsibility on our shoulders, not to be underestimated, very powerful. We can create very positive experiences. We can actually really, quote unquote, change the world with good design. Design is very powerful if you can think about the people you're designing for. Design can be very negative if you fail to think about the people you're designing for and you're consumed by this idea that I want to make something beautiful at the cost of everything else. So, function, people, everything else is fine.
So moving on to your another project, that is T-Work. So what was the initial inspiration for the design concept for that project?
Yeah, it's an interesting project. It's a government project, and working with the government is not for the faint-hearted. But it's also a great opportunity working with governments because they have a very clear mandate, and you sometimes get the freedom that you perhaps don't get in privately commissioned projects because they are so direct. We need X square feet, we need it for this budget, and go do your thing. So I think there's a certain fun in working with the government. Of course, the process sometimes can be daunting. So we again started out by questioning what is the purpose of the building, and we said the building is essentially a maker space. It's probably Asia's largest maker space, if I'm right. So, as you know, a makerspace is a place where people can come and work with their hands. It's got every imaginable tool from everything from laser cutting, 3D printing, water jet cutting, clay modeling, pottery, fabrics, wood shop, machine shop, you name it, right? They have everything. Graphic design, reprographic studio, all of that. So they have everything you can imagine with the idea of creating physical things, every process you can think of. So we said, and then it's located in one of Hyderabad's hottest real estate areas where the land value is probably the highest in the city, without a doubt. So, of course, the government owns this beautiful 5-acre piece of land, and we were asking ourselves, what should this building be? I mean, the building is essentially a very democratic space. The idea of T-Works is rooted in the fact that if you provide people tools, they will make beautiful things, amazing inventions. Cities that have maker spaces have shown that they have more patents and more inventions of products. And there's also the background of the fact that Hyderabad's got a lot of IT industry, and there's an overdose, if you will, of people working in the virtual world, and there's not enough people working with their hands and making things, and we are forgetting how to make products and things and cups and boxes and cars, and we are all thinking about code and really getting too virtual in terms of our lifestyle. And so it was a very great initiative by the government of Telangana, and we said, what does this building need to be? We looked at the urban context, and there was a lot of what I call look at me architecture, capitalism at play, right? Capitalism breeds, individuality, which is great. And I have no qualms about architecture that is being very eye-catchy and glamorous and glittering and glitzy. Absolutely fine. That's what America has taught us. Capitalism. Go to New York, you see every building trying to catch your attention. But what I realized is, in the chaos of the complex urban fabric of Indian cities, which is very, very dense and very complex and very eclectic, because everybody's building is unique, and everybody is using the buildings to express themselves or their brand or their identity. Sometimes it's easy to stand out of the crowd by not doing anything. So the T-Works building is just a glorified box. It's a shed. It's actually a steel building. It's really like a factory. And it's very calm and very self-assuring. It's not about look at me. It's about come to me. Please come. I'm here. I'm very stable. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just calm. It's not about me. It's about you. So the building is very muted. It's very understated. It's a box. It's a box, and it's got certain materials that are designed purely. We put polycarbonate on the front facade to bring in diffuse light. We put some glass on the east to bring in natural light. We put some glass on the north because that's a safe place to put glass. And on the west, we put polyurethane foam panels, puff panels, because we want to cut heat. So it's a simple, again, a logical, very scientific, very rational amalgamation of various materials and ideas, all culminating in the fact that it's a very humble building. It is not about the building. In many ways, it's like the argument or the debate over museums. What should a museum be? Should a museum be exhibit number one and say, hey, look at me? Or a museum should say, it's not about me, it's about the art inside. So I'm very humble, I'm a box, I'm simple, don't look at me, look at the art inside. So in many ways, we had the same predicament, and we said it's not really about the building, it's about the machines it houses, it's about the people, it's about the creations, it's about what people can create with the machines. And the building should be very self-assured, should be very reticent, should be very restrained, but at the same time very confident and very much present, so people can observe it, people can accept it as a part of their community, but also approachable so people can come in because it's a very democratic space. Like I said, T-Works, anybody can walk in and say, hey, I have an idea. Can I make a new pressure cooker? Can I make a new watch? Can I make a new cup? And they say, sure, here are the tools, make it, or come up with an idea and sketch it and make it. So we thought that the building needed to be very, very calm and very approachable and very much, I think by the simplicity of its form, we're actually able to stand out. If you see the context now, since we photographed it, it's actually grown. So it's like the only empty spot in the whole urban fabric. There's high rises, it looks like Manhattan. And then we got this one little building, or not little, but low rise building, which is our project. And it becomes almost like this urban plaza. People come in there, hang out. So it's really designed to be like an oasis. And now that we've seen all the growth around it, we actually believe that it's kind of worked.
So moving on with the same project, I wanted to ask, how does this project reflect Studio Chintala's commitment to sustainable and site-responsive architecture?
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, I kind of have grown to, because I worked in the States for 21 years, in the United States, and for very large firms. And through the 90s, late 90s, and the entire decade of 2000s. So I was there for, mostly the San Francisco Bay Area, and the whole quote unquote green building and sustainability, and I mean has been, I think, I mean I'm we couldn't have a conversation about design without talking about sustainability, and for good reason. And I am absolutely thrilled about the fact that that's become a conversation piece. But we like to think of it as if it's like breathing. You don't talk about your breathing all day long. Like, I'm breathing. Thank God I'm breathing. Of course, buildings have to be sustainable. I think there's no two ways about it. So excuse me, I think this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I don't think sustainability should be made such a big deal because it has to be an inherent quality. It's like breathing. Hello. How can you not breathe? And how can you keep talking about breathing, constantly reminding people, oh, today I woke up and I'm breathing? Sustainability is a little bit like that to me. Of course, buildings have to be sustainable. And that cannot become a feature and something you talk about because that is your responsibility. And to say, I'm a green architect, wear a kurta and like say I'm green architect and I do work with mud and bamboo. Everything that is designed right is sustainable. So we're not the ones that keep on beating on the subject and saying sustainability, sustainability. We give a lot of importance to sustainability. In fact, we start with sustainability. We cannot start anywhere else. Of course, we put people in the center, but then sustainability is a close, very much part of the genesis of a project. Everything we can do from a passive design standpoint. We are a country that is not rich in resources. Air conditioning is expensive. In America, I worked there and practiced there for 21 years. You seldom, in the 21 years, I don't think I've ever been part of a project where we said, how do you orient the building to cut heat gain? Never. Never, because you got abundance of energy, electricity is cheap, you can pump air conditioning, and you're like, done. We can't do that here. And I don't think it's right to do that in the USA as well. But somehow parking is the most important thing in America. The first thing you do is because the country is driven by the idea of cars and automobiles, and so the automobile dictates design. That's funny. But here, of course, you have to think about sustainability. So we did on T-Works. And like I said, every material that was chosen was a response to sustainability, to mitigate heat gain. I mean, the biggest challenge we have in India from a sustainability standpoint is cutting heat gain. Because if you can cut heat gain, you can create environments that are thermally comfortable, that become much more effective spaces for people to work and live in and enjoy. And if you can cut your reliance on air conditioning, then you've really brought value. If you can bring fresh air. So what we've done is essentially done all the passive strategies, the solar orientation of the building, like I said, the materials for the building are all informed by sustainability. We put in certain skylights to bring in natural light. We put turbo fans in the roof, which essentially suck all the hot air out of the building through stack effect, and then you get fresh air coming in from different parts of the building. We've left enough openings in the building to actually constantly allow for fresh air to come in, but the building is actually hybrid of air conditioning spaces. That meeting rooms, for example, are air conditioned, but then large atria and all of those spaces are actually naturally ventilated. So it's a really interesting example. And I think a lot of people get scared to mix the two, and it's okay. You can actually mix the two pretty effectively, and you can still dissipate the hot air and still bring in fresh air and still condition the air with strategies. Sustainability is 100% part of everything we do. But again, we don't like to make a big deal out of it, because I think we are actually doing a disservice by saying that is a sustainable architecture, which essentially validates the point that some architecture can be sustainable and some cannot be sustainable. And that's ridiculous. I think we have to put our foot down and say, stop making such a big deal about sustainability and not tolerate anything that is not sustainable, and make it matter of fact. Okay, architecture has to be sustainable. And the minute you start saying that is sustainable, then you're almost validating the idea that some architecture is not sustainable. And by virtue of saying that, you're also saying some architecture is okay to not be sustainable. I think I'm pushing the point here a little bit too much, but the point is, we just are so clear that sustainability cannot be forgotten that we don't like to talk about it that much. I hope that makes sense.
So moving on to another project, E-Positive Labs. So how did you balance aesthetic goals with practical and budgetary constraints for this project, that is E-Positive Labs project?
So again, it's a very interesting question, very interesting project. We're in the thick of the construction. We've got our fingers crossed. It has to be completed in a year. The client is waiting to occupy it. Now, the client's a large energy company. They are moving into new areas of sustainable energy. They are creating this project as a way to enable research in sustainability, not for India, but for the world. They want collaborators from all over the world to come here and research sustainable energy sources and energy strategies beyond solar, beyond wind, beyond thermal, beyond the hydro, beyond all of those things. They want to keep pushing people to explore sustainability. So, and energy sources for sustainable use. So the building is really a very, very humble, honest, sort of very, very thoughtful sort of exercise from a company that's actually very much mainstream commercial. So they've created this project that's really about research, really about finding new ways to sustainable energy, to bring sustainable energy. So we said, what should the building be? Again, there's a great emphasis of landscape here in this project. So we have 6.5 or so acres, and we said, and it's right by the Hyderabad airport. It's, I think, within a kilometer of that or two, or within the airport campus. And it's got a lot of visibility, a lot of people driving by. And we said, what should the building be? And we said, it's really about, again, honesty and worrying about the people that work there. And we said, we want to allow people to really enjoy the campus. So the first thing we did was we said, how can we create a campus that is seamless and expansive? And so we came up with this idea of creating a forest, an urban forest, if you will, with a beautiful water body, which is rainwater harvesting. So everything was driven by this idea of sustainability. And we wanted to make sure, and this is a net zero building. So zero energy is going to be used from outside. And as you know, net zero buildings are not just about energy, they're about the entire ecosystem. So the waste that it generates, the water that it consumes, every aspect of the project, right down to the food and everything that is consumed, is net zero. And that's how we define net zero. So we started out by creating this large forest, and we wanted people to enjoy the entire 6.5 acres. So how do you do that? When you have buildings, you got 2.5 lakh square feet of buildings to build. So we raised all the buildings up on these very slender steel columns, which essentially allowed us to do a forest, the entire campus. We got a big pond, which is not a manicured, not a very sort of curated pond, but it's a natural pond. We have natural flora and fauna. We have frogs and fish and grasses and weeds and all of that. And then we have this forest that spreads out, and the buildings are hovering up. So the idea was that if you're walking in the campus, unless you look up, you should not know that you're actually in a city and in an urban environment. So the buildings are all hovering up above, and of course the only things that meet the ground are the course, because you have to take the elevators up. But otherwise we raised all the buildings up, and the lobby, of course, because you're having to walk into the lobby and access the rest of the floors. But otherwise everything is raised on these stilts, if you will. And so that gave the basic aesthetic or the form to the project. And then, of course, we started using all our sustainability concepts. So all facades on the west and the south have these massive screens to cut heat gain, which are about a meter away from the facade. So you create shading and you cut heat gain. They're perforated, so you still get the view. You can still see through, but you cannot, you're presumably cutting a lot of the heat gain. So strategy number one. So the form is derived by, again, sustainability, the idea of net zero in this case. And we had a huge burden and responsibility because we were not any LEED platinum or LEED silver. We are going for net zero. In fact, the project is called E positive because we are energy positive. So we're going beyond net zero, and we're saying we're net positive, which means we're not only going to be zero, we're going to go beyond and actually generate more energy than the building is consuming. So we got solar panels everywhere, some small token examples of wind, tapping into wind energy. We're using all the rainwater in the campus, and the entire project's aesthetic, if you will, form is derived by those ideas. And so what you see is very minimalist cuboids floating above a ground plane, which is predominantly vegetated with a natural pond. and people crisscrossing, scientists walking. And we created this beautiful expression called the spline, which is an open veranda, an open corridor, an open connector that connects all buildings. It's actually very open, there's no walls. So scientists and researchers can be walking there, they interact, and they're designed for interaction. So you have spaces there, you can sit down and have an informal meeting, you can have coffee, we have vending machines, we have little cafes all around this pond. This loggia, this long spline becomes the connector. It also connects everybody, but it also creates a beautiful social space and communal space. So the building is really, again, very much form follows function, very dumb, simple boxes that are assembled around a courtyard, which is a beautiful pond, and and it is what it is. We put certain materials to cut heat gain. We put the mesh to cut heat gain, bring in natural light, diffuse light in some places, and that's where we are. And what comes out is purely driven by the function and the honesty of the function.
What are the key challenges and rewards of creating contextual, relevant architecture today, and how does your studio navigate these in their practice?
Key challenges of work that is driven by conceptual thinking. There are, it's very interesting. The question is very interesting because I don't think my biggest fear and skepticism, if you will, when I was returning to India with this idea of setting up a practice, was people of this country have the patience to listen, and it's a little arrogant to think, understand some of the ideas. Um, so, but really listen to the ideas that we have. And I was really scared. I was like, what if all these ideas that we're trying to, it's more about the value system actually, all these values that we are espousing, what if these didn't even have the audience and people didn't care and they're like, that's enough, I don't want to hear all this nonsense, just shut up and build the building. And so that was my biggest fear, because every project we do is rooted in certain intellectual conversation. The only thing we ask clients is, talk to us. We can't design if you don't talk to us. It's very hard to design if you don't talk to us. Because how can I design something when I don't know? How can a tailor make a suit if you can't give him your measurements, right? It's like that. I mean, how can you design a house without understanding the people that live in there? So we the only thing we ask people is, please engage with us. Please let us talk to you. Please give us a chance to understand you. And so our values were driven by that. And I was a little bit concerned that what if people didn't really understand the importance of talking. But after being in practice for 8 years now, our studio is 8 years old, just about 8 years old, I'm amazed at the beauty of this country and our clients. I mean, I dare say people talk more about their needs here than I would ever anticipated. And it's really amazing that we are able to communicate. And all the work we pulled out has really been a result of us being able to talk to them. I mean, do you think somebody would accept a cube box in a very high value real estate and say, okay, that's fine? Because everybody wants something glamorous, everybody wants the glitter, and we're able to convince people that buildings don't have to be always glamorous. Buildings don't have to make a lot of loud noise. And our conceptual thinking is actually making sense to clients. And I think part of the reason, if I can call it success, I don't want to get too carried away by this, but if for a minute, if we say our ideas are being successful, or at least we're able to communicate to our clients, it's really because we're, I think what we're doing fairly well is articulating our ideas to clients. We're engaging in a conversation. We're saying, we have clients who say, I worked very hard and worked very hard. I came from zero to here and I made a bunch of money. Now I'm in a good place. I want to build a house that really shows the world that I've arrived. And yes, there are two ways to show the world that you've arrived. You can either put a lot of glitter on the building and marble and this and gold and blah, 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 or you can show You can make a building that is very magnanimous, very humble, very magnificent in the humility. And it can be still a testament to your hard work and your success and your growth. You can still tell the world that you've come the hard way, you've really toiled night and day, and you've really made this money that you have through a lot of dedication and devotion and blah blah blah, without having to slap on a bunch of materials on the building and make it really kitschy and shiny and glittering and all that. You can still do something that is very clean and honest and not too loud, and still let the people in the world look at it and say, wow, that's so graceful and magnificent. I wonder who lives in there. And we've been able to talk to clients and tell them, even though they come to us and say, I want a house that looks like $1 million. And we say, okay, but why? Because I want to tell the world that I worked very hard and I came and I made it and I've arrived. Okay, there are two ways to do it. I can put a lot of glitter on your building, or I can make a building that's really very confident, very comfortable, very calm, but still magnificent. And they go, can you do that? Yes, absolutely. You don't have to be screaming to the world saying, hey, look at me. You can best be there gentle, calm, very reticent, but very self assured. And architecture can do that. And we are able to communicate to clients and we're able to connect with them, and they're able to comprehend this ideology, and they're allowing us to do the work we do. So is very, very gratifying. And for me, I can't get over the fact that people actually listen, people actually indulge in conversation, people actually listen to rationality. There hasn't been a single project that we have not been able to communicate the importance of simplicity and not necessarily being all glamorous. And we're not against glamour. I mean, I want to make sure I don't send the wrong message. I think there is a certain beauty in exuberance and detail and joy and glamour and glitter, and we love that. I mean, it's like, when you dress for a wedding, you go all out. Of course, it's fun. So we're not boring, white, minimalist. I don't even like to define ourselves as minimalist because it becomes a style. I think we are driven by the idea of function, driven by the idea of people. And sometimes you can do it in a simple way. That's it.
So, how do you view the impact of project documentation and publication on today's architecture industry? And could you share an example of any particularly challenging project where it was very difficult to document that project and which had played a very key role and had a very wider recognition through publication?
I think, yeah, it's a good question again. I think we live in a society that is architecture has always been understood. If you're not living in a building, and which we don't live in all buildings, we only live in one or two buildings or work in one or two buildings. So we really interact with only a couple, three buildings on a daily basis. And the bulk of the architecture that we look at is visual, you know, and we have six senses or five senses, and then the most important one is vision, because I think 60% of our experience of the world comes from vision. So a lot of our understanding of design is what we see, and a lot of architecture is documented by photographs, and it's like, whoa, that looks cool. Okay, but architecture is not sculpture. Architecture is not something to look at. Architecture, it is looking cool to you on a cover of a magazine or on or Instagram post, but is it really, what is it like being inside the building? I think that is the crucial question. Because architecture, yeah, I mean, you look at a building, you like it, great, you don't like it, you move on. But if you live in the building, you like it or not, you have to deal with it. And so we, as a community, as a society, as architects, are as much guilty as the rest of the world. We live in a very, very materialistic value system that is driven by what things look like. It's sort of similar to, you have a friend who is really beautiful, and you have a friend that is really beautiful on the inside. They have a beautiful soul, and that soul never, the beauty never fades. You get older and the building gets, I mean, the beautiful friend goes less beautiful, or the beauty fades away, but the 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 friend with the beautiful heart is always beautiful. And so it's like that. I mean, architecture is looked at, what meets the eye as a visual treat, as a visual delight, and we go, wow, that's beautiful. I think with documentation, that's the problem. And how do you document experiences? You can't. I mean, videos do some justice. I think when you walk into a space or walkthroughs of spaces, I think do certain amount of justice. And we have the tools. I mean, we all have phones in our pockets, so we can actually document spaces and not just masses. And so you can do certain level of justice to the actual experiential part of architecture, but predominantly architectural journalism, architectural documentation is visual. It's about the form. It's less about the space. It's very hard to capture the essence of a space. You have to live in it, you have to experience it. So it's unfortunate, but you can't complain about it. It is what it is. It's very hard. Your other part of the question was it very hard to sort of document any of our projects? I think, yeah, especially when you make very simple boxes, it's very hard to make them visually appealing in a photograph. I think when you experience them, they look a lot more calmer and less chaotic and a lot more laid back and self assured and restrained than some of the urban chaos that we have. So we create things that are trying to be calm and just okay. It's okay. It's okay not to be loud. And so yeah, I mean, for example, a T-Works project is a big box. And how do you photograph a box to communicate its ethos of simplicity, honesty, and function, and all of those? It was challenging, but again, we go with the same attitude that we go with when we're documenting our projects, that we go with design, is just solve the problem. Let's tell the story as it is. Don't embellish it. Don't find ways to make it look like what something else. Hey, be honest, it's a box. It's a box. Let's not make any bones about it. It is a box. And so I think the same approach that we employ to design, and that is of honesty, is the same approach we use to document our projects. And we just say it is what it is. And we have a certain level of matter of factly approach to it. It is what it is. It's okay. I mean, we don't have that urgency to make it look like something it's not. And I think that's probably at this point the best approach for us. Just let it be and let it do what it's doing.
So, heading to the last question for the day, Diwakar. After 10 years of running your own architecture studio, what are the key lessons you have learned so far, and what advice would you like to give to the aspiring architects who are looking to start their own studio somewhere?
Well, firstly, we've only been doing this for 8 years. I hope we'll be around for 10 years and longer. But yeah, for the last 8 years that we've run this practice in India, think if you're starting your own studio, and I know what it feels like because not too long back is when we were in that same situation. I think my first question was, okay, I'm gonna open the door, put a desk and a chair, and say we're open for business. Now what? Like, oh my God, like, will people actually start believing you? Yes, I've done amazing work in the States with some of the best firms like Skidmore, Owings and Merrill and Gensler and all those big names on the planet for 20 years. But will people buy that, and will they just walk in the door and give you a commission? And that's a very daunting, scary proposition to be starting something on your own. I think, but biggest message I can share is that it's like when people stand on a stage at the Oscars and they say, this Oscar is for my family and my belief and blah blah blah. They're actually meaning it. They're not just bullshitting. It's actually true. I think when you put your head down and really focus on doing what is right, a lot of the rest falls in place. At least that's what I would like to believe, and that's based on our experience. So, yes, we live in the age of social media and Instagram and promotion and self promotion and branding and public persona and da 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 da. And I think they're all realities. We are not stupid to run away from those and be reclusive. But I think all that, despite the fact that there are architects and there are artists and there are people that are constantly promoting themselves, constantly trying to be in the public eye, and it works. I mean, you can tell it works. You can be judged by the number of followers. I think you make a salad and put it on Instagram and you get 10,000 followers, and you work for 3 years and build a building after nights and nights of not sleeping and fighting and arguing and pleading and begging, and you get like 50 people like your building, and you're like, okay. So we live in a world which is very much driven by branding and social media and visibility and marketing and all of that. And my message would be, is okay. Because when you put your head down and really focus on what's important, the rest falls into place. And I mean, we think of our practice, we think of what we're doing is very important. We believe we're doing the most important work on the planet, in the country, and we take it very seriously. It's like life or death for us, and no project is less important, and every project is a matter of life and everything is an amazing opportunity, even if you're designing a spoon or a business card for some client, because we do architecture, art, graphic design, product design, landscape design, furniture design. We're very greedy. We want to do everything on the planet. So we're even making film, we make documentaries, we write books, we publish books for other people, we make business cards for people, we do branding, we're making websites, UI, UX. So we public art installations, urban installations, all those. So I think if you just put your head down and work hard and stick to your beliefs and your values, funnily enough, the world is cruel, but it's not that cruel that it can't recognize good talent and good intentions. It's really amazing. There is a lot of corruption, there's a lot of dishonesty, there's a lot of people trying to get ahead and pushing you down, all of that. And I think what I've realized just practicing the last 8 years is ultimately, if you just put your head down, work hard, there is enough faith, enough honesty, enough sincerity on the planet that your work will be noticed and you'll be rewarded. Whatever that means, rewarded to the extent that is possible. But I think you get your due. You get your due. And I think so we're not enamored by, I mean, you can get a lot of Instagram followers by making glamorous videos and talking about your stuff and promoting yourself and doing all these things, or you can just shut up and put your head down and work hard and get 5,000 followers who actually sincerely value what you're doing. So I'm purely talking about this because you're talking about young architects, and everybody is like, I talk quite a bit at colleges and universities, and I get asked a lot by students, but we want our buildings to be noticed. How can you make a simple building and be noticed? Noticed by whom? People that care, or people that just notice because it's attractive, visually attractive? So what we've finally reconciled is that I think if you do, if you stick to your values, presumably you examined your values, and if you stick to them and are honest about them, a lot of it follows. And the business follows, the commerce, the finances. I know it's not easy to be practice architecture in this country. Very hard to run a practice sustainably, financially, very, very hard. I mean, I can't emphasize that, and I know there's a lot of architects out there that would agree. But I think as long as you just do the basics right, everything else falls into place. Easier said than done, I know that. But I think the proof is in the pudding, and we have kind of tested that, and we have never gone pleading, begging, doing anything else. Just get your fee, put your head down, be respectful, and move on to the next project. So that's the best message I can share with architects. You know, I think I don't think it's worth wasting our lives trying to do work that attractive because the world considers it attractive, or don't. I don't think you need to please the world's expectation of what good design is. I think you need to have a very strong point of view on what your idea of good design is and stick to it. Even though it may not be a popular opinion, I think as long as you stick to it and you're honest, you will get your due. You will be recognized. You get the fee to survive, maybe, and thrive, hopefully, and be comfortable and live a decent life, or a quality of life. And that's about it, I think. And if you do great work, sooner or later, the world is honest enough to recognize it. I think people will instantly recognize people who are glamorous, but I think if you're really honest with your work, it may take a little longer, but I think, funnily enough, despite what we've been told about the world, it's cruel and there's no justice and all that, actually, the world is not such a bad place. They will give you credit for what you've done, and you are appreciated for your hard work and your simplicity and your honesty.
Thank you, Diwakar. That was lovely to hear you. So, this was the last question for the day. Thank you so much for giving your precious time. It was a pleasure to have you here. And don't forget to sign up on the Publish website.